and we are in partnership with, for this panel tonight, with Equality New York, specifically the Committee on Bodily Autonomy. I want to thank my fellow organizers with the Bodily Autonomy Committee, Melissa, Kathy, Lindsay, for helping us put this together. And yeah, in general, I am the public policy director with NYSCASA. Outside of this, I'm a queer rights activist, and a lot of these issues intertwine. This is an intersectional topic of lived experiences, identities, and therefore policy topics. And just to give an outline of how this panel is going to go, I'm going to give each panelist their time to do their intros and why they're here tonight. And then I'm going to do an overview of the who, what, when, where, why, all that fun stuff of this bill. And then we have Senator Jabari Brisport here, a co-sponsor, who's going to give their perspective on why this bill is important and why he chose to support this bill. And then we're going to go right into our guiding questions, which are going to be the majority of this panel, discussing, the policy and the educational lens of why this bill is so important. And then at the end, we're going to have a viewer Q&A. You'll see the more details on that in the chat, how you can participate. And then we're going to conclude the panel. So let's get right into it. And I'm going to pass the intro over to Sarah, my colleague.
Hello, welcome everyone. I am Sarah Podber. I am my pronouns are she, her. I'm the prevention director at the New York State Coalition Against Sexual Assault. And I work with our rape crisis member programs across the state and other preventionists in supporting their work on sexual violence prevention throughout the state. Sorry, blank for a moment. I'm just happy to be here tonight and looking forward to this discussion.
Thank you, Sarah. And I'm going to pass it over to Pascale.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Pascale. I am the proud mother of 2 queer kids. And I'm here today because my children deserve, as all children in New York State, they deserve comprehensive sex ed. It's an important subject. And it's about time that New York becomes the progressive state that we believe we are.
Thank you so much. And Dr. Kia.
Yes, hello. I'm Dr. Kia Darling-Hammond, founder and CEO of Wise Chipmunk LLC, which is an education and research firm. I use she, her pronouns. Foremost, I'm an educator and researcher who focuses on creating the conditions for thriving, particularly for young people who possess multiple minoritized identities, which means that young queer kids qualify, Black girls. I've been building this work now for more than 25 years. I work with students, educators, organizations, and other entities like the Congressional Black Mental Health Brain Trust and the Congressional Black Caucus's Suicide Prevention Task Force, whose work supported the advancement of the Pursuing Equity in Mental Health Act. My training and scholarship and experience land at the intersections of education, human development, psychological well-being, and liberation theories. And so everything that I do is about acknowledging that human thriving depends on these mutually affirming and sustaining relationships. We need to know that we belong, and I believe that this comprehensive, developmentally sound sexuality education empowers people to make informed, wellness-centered decisions about their bodies, their mental health, and how they engage with each other as they move through life in bodies that have needs and desires and that mature and change over time.
Thank you so much. And Hugh.
Hi, everyone. My name is Hugh. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a proud New York State resident, and I was born and raised in Queens, New York, and went through the entirety of the public school system. And currently, I'm a student, an undergraduate student at a school in North Carolina, pursuing my bachelor's degree in political science. And really happy to be here and talk about the importance of this bill and how it impacts students like me and beyond.
Thank you. And this may be repetitive, Senator, but I'll let you do your intro before you bring your expertise on the issue later on.
Sure. Hi, everybody. State Senator Jabari Brisport. My pronouns are he, him. I'm the chair of the Children and Families Committee and also a former teacher.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to go over a little bit about what specifically this piece of legislation is about. First, it is the Comprehensive Sex Education in Schools bill. It would require that every K through 12 student in a public and charter school across New York State receive the comprehensive, as expected, and inclusive sex education that they are owed. Comprehensive and inclusive in this case being defined as medically accurate, evidence-based, and trauma-informed. There's a misconception that we already have this in New York State. That is not the case. In general, it is more of a suggestion. We have material that is provided, general material that is provided to schools, more as a recommendation. And it is left up to the school district as to whether or not they want to implement accurate sex education, if at all. And of course, that is a giant problem. This bill is in the form of an education mandate that would be based on the National Sexuality Education Standards. As an education mandate, unlike past education mandates, the preparation given to our educators, school administration, faculty to execute this bill is properly given to them to teach and be able to give justice to this topic. I want to share a little bit some statistics too, just to give an idea of like what we're dealing with currently. Only 14% of US middle schools and 38% of US high schools teach sex education. In multiple interviews that have been done, it's shown that schools that do provide sex education usually are from a strictly heteronormative lens and have made students less informed about sexual consent and or sexual assault. Current sex education lacks curriculum involving the prevention of intimate partner violence. In the US, 1 in 3 young people will experience physical, sexual, or emotional abuse from a partner before they are 18 years old. And on top of that, just to be as inclusive of the geographic areas of New York State, rural US adolescents who have received instruction about birth control declined from 71% to 48% among identifying females, and from 59% to 45% among identifying males. And it's really something to take that in. I'm taking it again right now. And it's incredibly startling. I think a lot of people look at New York State as an extremely progressive state. When we're looking at the national issue going on right now involving inclusive, accurate curriculum, I think people kind of push New York State to the side as though we got this, and that's just not the case. And I want to provide more perspective on that by handing it over to co-sponsor Senator Brisport to provide more of the current legislative standing on this and why this bill is so important.
Thank you, Max, and thank you to everyone who is speaking on the panel tonight and also everyone watching. Let's talk about some comprehensive sex education and why this bill is so important. So I introduced myself earlier, but again, my name is Jabari Brisport. My pronouns are he, him. I am a state senator from Brooklyn, proudly openly gay, the first openly gay legislator, Black legislator in New York State history. I am a former public school teacher and a proud co-sponsor of this bill. And there are many reasons to support it right now. I do want to bring up the fact that we are in a national conversation right now on literally whether queer people are allowed to exist in schools and exist in our education system, and whether young queer people are allowed to have a voice and be who they are. We just saw in another part of the country, in Florida, the passage of the Don't Say Gay bill, which would move us further back on civil rights, especially for our queer family members and community members. And I am reminded of the story of a former student of mine who came to me after I won my primary and saw the press, saw that their teacher was the first openly gay Black legislator elected to New York, and came to me in the fall after the primary and said, I really want to thank you for running. I want to thank you for being who you are. You have given me the ability to understand that I am non-binary. And this is a student who is going through puberty. They were, I had them as a 6th grader, they were becoming a 7th grader. And for them to feel the confidence to stand in their truth and share who they are is just part of why we do this, to give students, especially queer students, a voice in the process and understand who they are better. So I really want to commend Senator Brook for bringing this bill to the table. I'm a proud co-sponsor. Again, it is a bill that will bring community together at a time when there are others who want to rip communities apart, but to bring people together to come up with age-appropriate curricula around national sex education standards, bringing together educators, administrators, parents, experts, although in some way we are all experts in our own way. Everyone is the expert of their own life experience. But again, before my time is up, I do want to remind, again, as a former teacher, I noticed that oftentimes in politics, we do not treat students as smart as they are. And part of education is understanding and having the faith in our students to know that knowledge for them truly is power, and that this is a student empowerment bill. It empowers students to push back some of the really unfortunate things that Max was mentioning earlier. This empowers students to defend themselves against abuse, sexual abuse in cases. It empowers students to avoid STIs or unwanted pregnancies. It empowers students, especially our LGBTQ students, to know who they are and how and to figure out, in a very difficult part of life, who they are and who they're going to be. And I think that this is the year for it to pass. Again, I'm a proud co-sponsor, and I do want to thank Max for inviting me to this, and thank all the panelists for being here. And again, thank you all for watching and being part of this discussion, one of many that have happened and one of many to come. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here, Senator. We appreciate your perspective on this. Thank you so much. Yeah, and I want to mention too, that what the senator was mentioning, what is going to uplift our queer students is going to uplift all of our students, as well as our educators, who a lot of the time feel like they're left in the dust without the training and resources that they need to be there for our students and simply understand further the causes that are personal to them and that they want to put constructive and productive energy into. And right now this is unfortunately very timely, right? Most education issues or most issues, in my opinion, are stem from education issues, as we're dealing with the rollback of abortion, healthcare, and reproductive rights across the country. And this bill, of course, taps into that. I want to go right into the first guiding question, and I want to start actually with you first, Hugh, as a student activist. From the lens of what brings you here today, why is this bill's passage important for our sexual violence prevention and survivors, youth, and our education system as a whole? And I want to hear everyone's perspective, and we'll start with you, Hugh.
Thank you. Loaded question that has very important answers, and you'll hear from all the different panelists of sort of the variety of answers that we'll bring. I think as a student and identifying as a queer student and moving through the public school systems and Title I schools, learning about my queer identity as sort of this, I learned about it very inadvertently through sort of my relationship with the people around me and how I was treated because of my queer identity. And it was not always particularly positive. A lot of it was sort of gaining respect because I continued to identify the way that I did and still existed in the space itself. And I had the support of administration, which I think is particularly important. And this bill really does a phenomenal job of highlighting that importance. If it's in sort of the curriculum, we're having those conversations. I think one of the greatest sort of benefits of education is it implores students to replace sort of judgment with curiosity and answers, and having those answers be correct and based in actual science and lived experience. I know for me personally as a queer individual allows me to sort of replace the shame that has been put on my identity and the internalized sort of transphobia and queerphobia that I deal with on a consistent basis. And it allows me to sort of enter almost a spiritual practice of relearning who I am and the people that are in my life, whether it be romantically or just platonically, and having those conversations very early on, I think greatly would have benefited my experience as well as my cisgender and straight classmates as well. So it's a little bit about what I think.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, that's an excellent point, right? I mean, a lot of people think inclusivity, regardless of the topic, is just sort of this nice thing to do, right? But by being inclusive, we are being factually accurate. Facts matter. So thank you for bringing that up. Dr. Kia, I mean, we've known each other for a bit now with other Equality New York or now NYSCASA. Would you like to elaborate on what Hugh was saying?
I would love to. Thank you. I think I'm going to start with a shout out to my 8th grade health and sexuality education teacher, Mr. Einhorn, who taught me in the late 80s at Albert Leonard Middle School, because he was that teacher who created a space for us all to exist and belong and to learn facts. I think the question you've asked is such a big question, and Hugh, you did a beautiful job. I wrote down what you said about replacing judgment with curiosity. I think that's absolutely brilliant. We were asked about sexual violence and sort of the system in people's lives as a whole. And we know that deliberate sexual violence is about exerting control with an intent to harm, and that's the behavior of a hurt person who's seeking to deliberately hurt others, needing to feel in control or powerful and using a toxic toolkit. And we know that we live in a society that also has normalized sexual coercion, right? And people harming others thoughtlessly. And so we've got this pretty nasty sort of situation going on. And, a lot of people were grappling with that in the aftermath of Me Too, right? Oh my gosh, did I commit a sexual assault in 1992 in college? That kind of stuff. So we're dealing with that. And then we also know that as a person's identities are located further and further from our culture's idealized norm, they're more likely to experience victimization. So for example, Black trans women experience shockingly and disproportionately high rates of interpersonal and intimate partner violence. Disabled girls similarly experience these shocking and disproportionate rates of sexual assault. And this happens in part because these are people in communities that are treated as if they're disposable, right, in a million subtle and overt ways, including being excluded from conversations about bodies and health and identities. And this bill gives us the power to change that, right? But it requires real action. So like when minoritized people are humanized, when our presence is acknowledged and celebrated, when we are protected by policies like this and the practices that they engender, when our inherent dignity is affirmed, we become safer and everybody else around us becomes safer. Harm begets harm, right? The recipe for a healthy society contains these ingredients of a free and equitable education and building healthy relationships, right? So I think all of that is to say that this bill implemented with fidelity is a crucial step to acknowledging, demystifying, and destigmatizing completely human things that happen with bodies and identities and the work of relating to each other. And it prioritizes that we each have a right to safety and a right to health and a right to pleasure. I think young people who understand what's happening, why it's happening, the history and the context that they've inherited, and how to respond in an empowered way, there's that word again, make self-preserving, self-actualizing decisions, which lead to better outcomes. And that's across the lifespan, right? Those better outcomes include less likelihood of incarceration, higher economic stability, healthier relationships, a lower likelihood of engaging in self-harm. So this, harm reduction, harm response, and the opportunities for healing and repair are also going to be outcomes of creating this honest discourse about just humans being humans in the world.
Thank you, Dr. Kia. I think that would be a great transition to go to Sarah to talk about our work with NYSCASA.
Thank you, Max. I was thinking the same thing. And thank you, Dr. Kia. You said so much about why this bill really is a sexual violence prevention bill as well, right? Coming from my perspective of working with our rape crisis member programs who are often the prevention educators in the communities they serve, going into the schools that they can get into, right, to provide sexual violence prevention programming with the youth in those schools. I think one of the reasons this bill is so important is because currently, like, our educators and other sexual violence educators are not in all the schools across New York State, right? Not every student in this state is receiving effective or any education around sexual violence prevention, around what healthy relationships are, around identifying, abusive relationships. Often are in some of more closed off or conservative communities, our rape crisis programs have difficulty getting into those schools to provide that sort of education. New York State currently doesn't mandate that. We do have Aaron's Law in this state, but that didn't go far enough in terms of the standards, right? And that only is required up through 8th grade. So what happens in high school, suddenly high schoolers don't need to know about what a healthy relationship is, what consent is. Sexuality education that is based off of the national, sexuality education standards really covers all those bases around not only what we know to be effective prevention programming, what that, looks like, but also in general, and prevention programming, around health issues in general, but also targeting, known risk factors around sexual violence, targeting the things that we know need to be discussed at age appropriate levels with all students in our schools throughout the state, things like consent, things like, for young children being able to name their body parts, right, in case they are being abused, and being able to communicate that to a trusted adult. Things like healthy relationship and healthy sexuality, and what that looks like in order to, be able to create, adults in the future and youth, right, at that age who know how to be in healthy relationship with each other, and to reduce the chance of them actually committing sexual violence. So, for us, from our perspective as NYSCASA and working with our member programs, is really, make sure that sexual violence education is happening with all students, and not just the ones that are maybe in a sports group, after school, that our member programs are working with, but it's something that's required for every student in the state.
Thank you, Sarah. I also want to mention, everyone will find in the chat further resources if needed. If any of these topics come up that you want to have more services, resources available, you'll find more information in the chat regarding that. Let's move on to Pascale to talk about, you have 2 queer children. Is that correct?
Yes, I have a trans son who came out at 10 years old, and I have an agender pansexual child who's 11, who came out at 10. 10 is the magic age in my house. Yeah, and for me as a parent, it's really important, just very early on, it was important for me that my children understand, as Dr. Kia was saying, proper body parts. And I know my family's from the Caribbean, we're Haitian, we're Catholic. And so, saying vagina was a real big thing. And I was married, my ex is a Southern Baptist. And so it was a big thing. But for me, it was really important because I needed them to understand what their body parts were and who was allowed to touch it. They were, because it's part of who they are. No one else can touch it without your consent. And I think that this is what this bill does. It teaches children the body parts age appropriately. It teaches them to have ownership of their body, which is really empowering. And because we started those conversations just very early on in my household, I'm blessed that at such a young age, both my children know who they are, and they were able to articulate that to me. And so I'm really, really just happy about that. And I also hear some of the conversations, and, we still, unfortunately, as a society, give a pass when, a little boy pulls a little girl's hair. Oh, he must like her. No, if you like somebody, you're not mean to them. And I think that we need to, just break down those old, outdated thoughts about how one expresses affection. Affection does not hurt. If someone is your friend in kindergarten, they're not going to take your things from you. And so that's really what comprehensive age-appropriate sex ed looks like. It talks to children, what is a good friend, and continues to build. And I know a lot of parents hear, medically accurate comprehensive sex ed, and they're like, oh my God, they're going to teach my kindergartner how to put a condom on a banana. Nobody's going to do that. That is not what this bill is. This bill is, however, going to teach your kindergartner that they need to ask, can I touch, your backpack? Can I please share, this bench with you? All the things that really allow children to have the proper language and to also help them get in touch with their feelings. Why are you so upset with so-and-so that you decide to pull their backpack or pull their hair or what have you? And this is when these discussions of bodily autonomy and safety and healthy relationships start. And we continue as the kids get older, continue to have these discussions with them. And when they are in junior high school and high school, and we do talk about sex ed, it's very heteronormative. And, I often say to people when I talk about my children, it is not their job. It is not my 10-year-old or my 13-year-old job to deal with transphobia or homophobia. It's my job, right? I have to, as their parent, but also as a cisgender heterosexual ally, I have to be an upstander. And I have to be the one to say no. And I think that, for parents as well in the home, they don't have these kind of conversations. And comp sex ed, when the kids come home and they're going through the material, sit with them and see. Because a lot of parents, again, have very outdated thoughts about what is sex ed. In my family, when I was growing up, it was don't come home pregnant. Well, how do I not do that? Nobody told me how not to do that. And I think it's very important that we have these discussions.
Thank you. Yeah, that was incredibly powerful. And it shows, what this bill looks like and its topics on the daily lived experiences, which, is going to move this bill forward, right? Senator, I wanted to see what your perspective on all the conversation that is going on here, but also what are you finding amongst New Yorkers, people in your district, involving the stigmatization of these topics?
I'm finding that parents want to be empowered. And especially in New York City, right now, we have a system known as mayoral control, where the authority over the schools is very centralized right now. And parents honestly just want more of a voice. I called this a student empowerment bill earlier, but you could also say this is a parent empowerment bill, because the bill itself does not dictate what the curriculum is. The bill gives the power to community members, including parents, to come together with experts and educators to say, this is what we believe our children should be taught based on national standards, to ensure that they feel good about who they are and that they know who they are and they can empower themselves.
Thank you. So the next question, Pascale, you touched on this a lot, which thank you. What are some continued consequences our children will experience the longer we wait for this bill to become law? And that's an important aspect too, right? It's not what will the consequences be. The consequences are happening right now, the longer we wait. And with that, this question is two parts. So if you need me to remind you of the second part, please let me know. But what are some myths about this bill that are simply not true? Which again, Pascale, you tapped into this as well. I'm going to start again actually with you, just as a student activist, and from your lived experience. What do you think the continued consequences are going to be as long as this is not the law?
As a student and someone who had received pretty good sexual health sort of education, I still can sort of point out a lot of the holes that still existed within it. And once again, I think a lot of it was my administration was very supportive of the idea of comprehensive sex ed, but there was sort of a lack of kind of pre-existing structure. So students were kind of coming into this space and didn't have sort of the language or proper relationship to consent. So it was hard to do a lot of that work. We were essentially playing catch up. And I think as a student now and being away from New York, lots of folks are very surprised in North Carolina and folks that I go to school with at New York lacks this sort of legality in comprehensive sex ed. I was telling some folks that I was on this panel earlier today, and they were shocked and astonished that there wasn't sort of that legality protecting students. And like you said, Max, I mean, the consequences are already so vibrantly clear within sort of individual relationships and sort of on a larger scale. As a student, I had heard many of things within sort of my relationship with fellow male identifying students that were just simply so wildly inappropriate. They weren't bad people. The same can be said for my female identifying friends or folks that don't identify within those sort of binaries. It was just some of the things that we were saying as children, yes, were just inappropriate. And that sort of comes with sort of being a young adult and growing and learning that there are inappropriate things to say and think. And I think we all would have just greatly benefited from someone sort of sitting us down. Like, well, why do we think these things? And why do we say them? Or why do we not say certain things? And I think that really does start very young, right? And we have those very honest conversations. I had those conversations in my household where we used the word vagina and penis. And a lot of it is just sort of a maturity thing. These are, parts of our bodies that exist with us for the tenure of our time here and beyond. And to get to know them, I think is a privilege and an honor. And although it should remain an honor, I don't think it should necessarily be a privilege. As I grew up in a household where I learned about the actual terminology of things, I think that should just sort of kind of be commonplace. And yeah, I sort of.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the idea of, I was recently editing a paper of my sister's friend, they both are in college, and you could see how evident it was our education system failed this person and how even higher education failed to correct them, because this is an issue that's going to be medical, social, and cultural. Not only were the paper was medically inaccurate, but there were words the person did not know were slurs to describe multiple communities of marginalized people. And that was disturbing, you know, like you were saying, Hugh, that this person has no bad intentions. It was just this ignorance of our system that had failed them. So thank you for bringing up that point. I want to actually bring it back to you again, Pascale, just to continue this this theme of what do you see, especially, or even with, you know, your children, your children's peers, of like what you think the consequences are going to continue to be if this bill doesn't become law?
I mean, I think one of the consequences is low self-esteem, right? Knowledge is power. And if you understand your body and you understand that it is yours and you have the right to say yes or no, you have power, and your self-esteem, your self-image is strong. And I think a lot of times, and particularly I think for queer students, they don't see themselves reflected in self-ed classes. And they don't think that they can have healthy, wonderful, beautiful relationships and even families. And it's really important that they see themselves reflected. And it's something that I'm kind of, with one of my children, I'm struggling with, because they're telling me, Mommy, I'm never going to get married. I'm never going to do these things. And it's because part of it is they don't see themselves reflected. And as a parent, it breaks my heart, because I'm like, no, I'm fighting for you to have a full life. And a full life means that you're supposed to, you know, have healthy sexual relationships. And, you know, they squirm because, again, they're teens and tweens. But, you know, it's important that you know that you should and can fall in love, and that you should bring pleasure to yourself so that you can let your partner know how they can pleasure you. You know, so I think all of these things are really about power and self-awareness. And needless to say, my children, you know, they think their parent is weird, but.
Thank you. Senator, what do you see, what is the myth busting that is going to have to happen, you know, especially with governmental operations in terms of this topic?
I would say the myth busting would be this unfounded fear with this bill, which is that government will enforce a specific curriculum on your children and tell you this is exactly what they will be learning, and you may not like it, but you have no say in it. And I think what we continually need to reinforce is that this opens up the space and allows for us to share a national set of standards on comprehensive sex education that will empower students and protect them, give them the tools to protect themselves from a variety of things, and that this will ultimately empower parents, that they won't just have a say, they will be designing the curriculum in concert with other experts. And which is, you know, you can't, I was a former math teacher, parents did not have a say in the math curriculum, you know, and this is a way to really just give them more of a voice in a way that, and it's great to have, you know, parents like Pascale on the call, you know, give parents a voice in a way that I think they will appreciate and know will ultimately help their children, you know, find themselves.
Thank you. Yeah. And, you know, there is this this hesitation, whether it be, you know, parents, the students directly, even, you know, teachers unions, because of past, not all, of course, but past education mandates that many people have found to be performative. that have, like I mentioned, left a lot of people in the dust without the training and resources that they needed. And I think it's important that we continue to advocate for this bill in a way that lets people know that this will not be the case. You will be prepared and you will have the right resources, right? I'm going to pass on to Sarah to provide some NYSCASA input.
Sure. I mean, I can speak to that. The second part, I think, of this question. I just want to raise up what Pascale has already shared around some of the myth busting, right? That I think that certainly NYSCASA and NYSCASA's member programs have seen this a lot in their work from communities, from parents that think that that anyone's going to be talking with like a 5-year-old about sexual intercourse, right? Like that's not what prevention programming or comprehensive sexuality programming looks like in the real world. Like no one's talking in the schools to young kids around about sexually explicit things. What consent looks like at that age, right, is exactly the sort of things that Pascale already mentioned around like asking, before hugging someone, before taking someone's toy, right? We have this cute book, Hands Off Harry, right, which is one of the books that like educators for one of the healthy relationship programs that NYSCASA has had our member programs trained in, one of the books that's used with kids at the kindergarten level. And it's nothing to do around sex. That book in particular isn't even anything to do about anatomy. It's just about, what are personal boundaries, right? About space and things like that. So everything is very age appropriate, right? And I think like at the end of the day, it's just about keeping kids safe, right? Keeping kids healthy and safe, which is like the kind of message that is usually very helpful for like parents who are hesitant to be able to hear and to know, right? This is just about like children's safety at the end of the day. So yeah.
Thank you. And Dr. Kia, what do you think about all this?
When I was first sort of thinking about this question, and the consequences, I was thinking about how heartbreaking it is when children experience shame. Like I imagine a 6-year-old internalizing that they're not supposed to exist, which is something that happens. And I imagine them taking that to heart. How do humans respond to a belief like that? I'm wrong, I shouldn't exist. And it's devastating and it's heartbreaking to me. And I think that's part of what happens when we fail to provide representative, inclusive, and affirming learning opportunities for young people. So Senator Brisport mentioned parental engagement in the design, and I was thinking it takes a village, right? And we are all in each other's village. If there's one thing this health moment is teaching us, is that what we do has implications for what other people experience. And so we can come together, to create the conditions for thriving that are about interrelationship, right? And a part of that, as Pascale mentioned, is creating the conditions for honest communication. And as Sarah mentioned, the conditions for consent and bodily autonomy. So for me, in response to this question, so much of this is about the fact that our bodies are stigmatized, right? So much about our bodies is stigmatized, and we learn it over and over and over again. It's baked into our society and our culture. So we learn to be ashamed of how we look. We learn to be ashamed of our natural bodily responses. How we smell, how much we menstruate, erections, early pubertal development, body hair, how big we are, or how small parts of us are, and so on. And we often end up attaching our sense of self-worth to these things because we're not communicating about, human bodies and the variety of ways that they can exist and their inherent dignity. what'll keep happening. Girls are sexualized at very young ages, both by people in their close community and by strangers who subject them to unwelcome predatory comments and contact, but not provided context, language, or strategies that will help them understand, protect themselves, and advocate for safety, right? We learn to be ashamed of desire. We become ashamed of how we express gender. I see the note. So shame is poisonous to our relationships and to us. It erodes belonging, it erodes trust, and it damages our bodies. And then the other point that I want to make is that there are real serious health concerns that are going largely unremarked and unaddressed, like polycystic ovarian syndrome, which occurs in 1 in 10 people who have a uterus, but is only diagnosed in 1 in 4. And it begins at the onset of puberty usually. And this is just not something that we're learning about our bodies. And it's accompanied by a long list of possible complications, from infertility to depression, right? And untreated can lead to serious issues like diabetes, heart disease, and cancer. It disproportionately impacts people of color and Black people in particular. And again, 1 in 10 people with a uterus is going to develop polycystic ovarian syndrome. And part of the reason we don't know about it is because we haven't normalized serious conversations and medical curiosity about the reproductive health of people, and in particular people with a uterus. And we have normalized menstrual discomfort. So the thing is that we are in our own way, and this bill gives us an opportunity to actually move forward.
Thank you. I'm going to combine the Q&A with our last question, just to make sure that we have enough time for everything. Our last question centering around what do you suggest that we can do to help support and move this piece of legislation forward? Whether that be, from the policy lens or just expanding comprehensive sex education while we get this bill to become law. So I'm going to see if anyone has a Q&A in the chat. Please drop that question. And let's start with Senator Brisport. How do you think we need to continue to put pressure on the legislature, the governor, to get on board with this bill?
Absolutely. Thank you, Max. You said the magic word, which is pressure. I want everyone to think of, how do we build political pressure? So in terms of timeline, the New York State legislative session ends June 2nd, which means we do not vote on any bills after June 2nd and then we don't come back to vote on things until January. So how do we build pressure? The links, and I believe, there's been a lot of information in the chat. I believe the links, the bill numbers are there already, so you can look them up and see if your state legislators are on there. Okay, so check for both. Check to make sure your state assembly person is on it, and just to see if your state senator is on the bill as well. And if they're not on the bill, call their office or email their office or go to their office or all three and say, why not? And can you get on the bill? And ask them if they're already on the bill, ask them if they can do more for the bill. Can they speak up in conference? Can they tell leadership they want to pass it? Can they do a planning meeting with the legislative sponsor in their house, whether that's the assembly sponsor or the Senate sponsor? I love her, Senator Brooke. Can they plan out a strategy in order to get it passed by June 2nd. And again, these conversations are helpful too. So always, if you are a person that wants to draft an op-ed, to be out there in the press, attend a rally, a demonstration, whatever you can, we have until June 2nd. And I think this bill has a great shot. And I know I would have loved to see it. And I would have loved for this bill to be in effect when I was a teacher. That's it.
Thank you. Let's pass it on to Hugh, our student activist.
I think a really important thing as a student is that my relationship to like a school building itself that's where I learned, right? Like that's where I went to school. And not only did I learn like academically, but I learned socially and politically, and that's the formation of who I've become as like an informed citizen, was from my school. And schooling and education has always been something that's been very critical to me personally, and within my family. And I think it's really important that our schools operate not only as a way to sort of develop the intellectual and academic prowess of students, but also where they get to sort of ask personal questions and get to know themselves better. Something that I always sort of wake up with, and the first thing that I think on my mind, it's a privilege I get to know other people better, and as a result, I get to know myself better each and every day. And there are many different things about a comprehensive sex ed education bill that would have allowed me to learn more about myself and more about other people, and how I can be a better ally to certain communities and groups, and vice versa, how certain groups and communities could be better allies to me. So I think it's just, once again, super critical to have this out there, and to allow students to know that educational spaces is more than just reading books and writing essays. It's about personal connection with professors or teachers, and also the students that for many kids spend their entire young adolescence with. In my case, I went to sort of conjointed middle school and high school. So from or even before middle school all the way to the end of high school, I was with the same kids and we got to know each other very well. And I do think there were missed opportunities to get to know each other at an even deeper level. So I really do think there is just sort of an endless amount of positive that can come from legislation like this. And I think it is honestly slightly embarrassing that New York lacks this proper sort of legislation currently.
Thank you. So we have two questions. We're going to try and get to both of them. The first one is, I'm going to leave this open to any panelist who wants to answer it first. How can nonprofit organizations further support this bill? Well, it's very, very broad, but I want to see if anyone has any particular suggestions. Oh, Senator?
Yes, one thing that I think a lot of people don't know is that oftentimes we get, and as legislators, what are known as memos of support or letters of support, or their opposite, memos of opposition or letters of opposition for bills. So, any nonprofit advocacy group can draft and say that we, New Yorkers for Comprehensive Sex Ed, whatever your group is, support this bill and encourage the legislature to take it up and vote on it. And you can send that as a memo of support to all state legislators. And then, and we track that, right? So when we're going through bills, we will say, oh, wow, this bill has like all these memos of support from all these various groups, right? From these nonprofits, from these labor leaders, all that stuff, that we take that into account. So that's one way, if you enjoy the written word and you want to contribute in that way, that's absolutely helpful.
Thank you. Before we go to our second question, does anyone want to add on to that? Okay. And the second one, which I think this is an excellent question as well. Where would preventionists, particularly those operating under EIE, the Enough is Enough, working with college students, fall under this law? And how can we fit into it? I think that's a great question. I want to see if any of the panelists would like to answer that. Just to reiterate again, how would preventionists, particularly those under EIE, working with college students, fall under this law? And how would they get involved, get into it? We can also expand the question too of how can anyone see, how can on college campuses comprehensive sex education prevention work move forward?
The only things that come to mind for me are, taking advantage of the curriculum and potentially as community members participating in curriculum development and design so that it's thinking up to the kind of K-16 domain. I think that could be really powerful because you see a different autonomy framework at the college level. And so how sexuality sort of plays out in that space is particular.
I think also essentially building on it's difficult, but trying to build those relationships, right, between the four-year colleges, the community colleges, and the high schools that are feeding into all of those, because with more students getting comprehensive sexuality education, right, you're going to have more students then with that knowledge base going onto college campuses, right? And it's important to have that in mind when you're then trying to engage them with sex ed and parental work on those college campuses. Because I mean, for example, we've heard from some of our EIE providers, right, that like there are kids who have, for example, received safe dates curriculum at high school level, and then at the campus, they're going through safe dates again, and they're kind of disengaged, right? Because they've already received that. So I think that this just requires working towards like better relationships and communication between like all those different grade levels, including into college campuses, because we know, like, especially in certain communities, right? Like certain high schools will feed into a community college, those community colleges will feed into a four-year college, right? And so there does need to be like a comprehensive approach across all those different levels.
Thank you, Sarah. And just to fit in as we wrap up, one more question that Gabriel put in the chat. They say, I don't want to sound against this because I'm 100% supportive of it, but may I ask what a roadmap would look like in this system, specifically in grade schools K-5 and middle school? So I guess what the roadmap would look like in implementing this in a K-5 and middle school setting, so under high school specifically. Or if anyone has suggestions, not the entire roadmap of how they think this needs to be appropriately discussed, implemented, put into action in these specific age ranges. Senator, I see your hand up.
Yeah, sure, because I think I understand the question, because it sort of veers into like what would be taught. And like just reiterating again, this legislation does not prescribe the specific curriculum, but does allow people to create one built on national sexual education standards. So I'm not going to read the full list of national education standards, but just to give you some examples from the list. Young kids, K-3 might do things like learning about different family structures, right? Or healthy relationships, positive communication. You heard, I forget who said it earlier, but like the notion of consent before asking for a hug, right? Stuff like that. And then maybe later grades 4 through 6 might be learning more about teasing, harassment, learning what sexual abuse is. Again, this is about empowering students to be able to protect themselves. Learning about HIV, beginning to learn about sexual orientation, as they begin to head into puberty. And I believe you said pre-high school. So I see in the national standards from grade 7 through not so straddling high school, but basically junior high. Again, looking at characteristics of healthy relationships, learning about STIs and STDs, how they're transmitted, things like that.
Thank you.
Oh, great. There's a link in the chat. I could have, yes, this is what you always bet. That's much better than me. Yes.
No, perfect. Thank you so much, Senator. And we are wrapping up here right on time. I just want to thank all the panelists for being here tonight and providing your perspectives and really just giving so much detail to this topic. Not only, what we need in New York State, but what essentially the nation needs. And they can use this as a model if it becomes law. Again, I want to direct people watching, please in the chat, you'll see the call to action to let your legislators know that you support this bill and they need to support it as well as a constituent and as a voter. And my information is in the chat if you have any questions for me, and your questions can be forwarded to Equality New York as well. So thank you very much for being here tonight.